Before we begin, this is your gentle reminder that if you enjoy this kind of quietly boring history, you can remember to subscribe later. Or not. There is no rush. No one is watching closely. Today we begin with Central Park, a place now associated with joggers, pigeons, confused tourists, and people who insist on playing saxophone at inappropriate volumes. But before it was a park, it was mostly inconvenience. In the early 19th century, New York City was growing in the way cities tend to grow when they have money, ambition, and very little patience. Streets stretched northward, buildings followed, noise multiplied, and people began to complain that there was nowhere quiet to sit and slowly think about nothing in particular. This was, historically speaking, unacceptable. At the time, many European cities already had large public parks, places where respectable citizens could stroll, reflect, and pretend they were not surrounded by other citizens. New York, by comparison, had mud, livestock, and a general sense of unfinished business. So the idea emerged: build a massive park in the middle of Manhattan, a calm green rectangle surrounded by chaos, simple in theory, less simple in reality. The chosen land, however, was not empty. It never is. It was home to small farms, rocky outcrops, squatters, and several communities that were quietly existing without asking to be relocated. Most notably, there was Seneca Village, a predominantly African-American community with homes, churches, and a school. It was not loud, it was not glamorous, but it was there. In the 1850s, the city decided that this land would be better used as a park. Through eminent domain, residents were forced to leave. Compensation was offered, though whether it was fair is still debated, usually by people who are no longer alive. Once the land was cleared, the real work began. And by work, we mean an enormous amount of digging, blasting, hauling, and arguing. The ground was uneven and stubbornly rocky. Thousands of workers, many of them Irish immigrants, spent years reshaping the landscape. Hills were lowered, swamps were drained, stone was blasted with gunpowder. This was not peaceful gardening. This was controlled geological frustration. At the same time, there was disagreement about what the park should even look like. Some wanted formal gardens, others wanted open meadows. Eventually, a design by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux was selected. It promised natural beauty, carefully engineered to look accidental. Paths curved gently, even when straight lines would have been faster. Trees were planted in ways that suggested they had always been there. The goal was to create an illusion of untouched nature, surrounded by a rapidly industrializing city that was very much touched. Construction took years, budgets were exceeded, deadlines were ignored, workers came and went. The park slowly took shape, while nearby residents watched with a mix of curiosity and irritation. During this period, Central Park was not yet relaxing. It was dusty in summer, muddy in spring, and filled with half-finished structures. If you visited, you were more likely to trip over something than feel refreshed. But gradually, almost reluctantly, it began to work. By the late 19th century, the park had become a place where people walked slowly, sat quietly, and observed one another without speaking. Rules were strict. Walking on the grass was forbidden. Music was regulated. This was not leisure. This was disciplined relaxation. Still, the idea of a shared public space took hold. Central Park became a kind of urban pause button, not perfect, not evenly accessible, but undeniably influential. And this is where we will stop for now, because building the park was only the beginning. What came next involved social rules, quiet scandals, and the ongoing struggle to keep a peaceful place calm in a city that never learned how. As Central Park slowly transitioned from an extended construction inconvenience into something resembling a finished idea, the city began to decide who the park was actually for. This question, as it turns out, was not answered quickly or generously. In the late 19th century, parks were not designed for everyone in the way we like to imagine now. They were designed for order, calm order, respectable order. The kind of order where people wore the correct clothing and walked at the correct pace, preferably without drawing attention to themselves. Early park regulations reflected this mindset. Games were restricted, loud gatherings were discouraged, eating on the grass was frowned upon. Lying down was often forbidden entirely, as it suggested fatigue, leisure, or worse, poverty. Central Park was meant to be admired, not used too enthusiastically. For the upper and middle classes, this arrangement worked fairly well. Horse-drawn carriages rolled through scenic drives. Families strolled along paths that curved gently for no practical reason. Benches were occupied by people thinking about things that were not work, which at the time was considered a luxury. For working-class New Yorkers, however, the park could feel less welcoming. Leisure time was limited. Clothing suitable for polite strolling was expensive, and the constant presence of park keepers meant behavior was quietly monitored. Relaxation, it seemed, required supervision. Despite this, people came anyway. Over time, the sheer size of the park made complete control impossible. Children ran, musicians played, vendors appeared. The rules bent slightly, then a little more. Central Park began to absorb the habits of the city around it, whether planners liked it or not. By the early 20th century, the park was firmly established as part of daily life. It was no longer an experiment. It was infrastructure. People crossed it to get to work. Others came simply to sit and be still in a city that rarely allowed such behavior without explanation. But popularity brought new problems. Wear and tear increased, grass suffered, paths eroded, maintenance costs rose, and as the city faced economic pressures, the park quietly slipped down the list of priorities. This decline became most visible during the mid-20th century. Funding decreased, staff was reduced, facilities aged. What had once been carefully controlled beauty began to look tired, in some areas neglected, in others avoided. During the 1960s and 1970s, Central Park developed a reputation that made many residents uncomfortable. Certain sections were considered unsafe after dark, crime increased, infrastructure deteriorated. The illusion of carefully managed nature was wearing thin. At this point, the park was no longer boring, and that, historically speaking, was a problem. Cities tend to prefer their parks dull, predictable, and quietly pleasant, so eventually attention returned. Restoration efforts began, slowly and expensively. Public-private partnerships formed. New management structures were introduced, grass was replanted, paths repaired, lighting improved. None of this happened quickly. Central Park does very little quickly. By the late 20th century, the park had entered a new phase, one where it was once again something to be proud of. Joggers replaced carriages, concerts replaced quiet carriage rides. The rules loosened, the atmosphere shifted, and yet certain patterns remained unchanged. The park continued to function as a pause in the city's rhythm, a place where time behaved differently, where people moved slower, even if they claimed not to notice, where sitting quietly became socially acceptable again, as long as one appeared intentional about it. Today, Central Park is many things at once: a historic landscape, a recreational space, a tourist destination, a backdrop for photos taken quickly and forgotten later. It absorbs millions of visitors without fundamentally changing its purpose, which is, at its core, to provide controlled nature in an uncontrolled city. It still requires constant care. Lawns must be rested, trees monitored, waterways cleaned. Without maintenance, it would return, slowly but confidently, to disorder. This is not a failure of design. It is simply how parks behave. And perhaps that is the most important detail. Central Park was never a finished project. It was, and remains, a negotiated space between nature and planning, between freedom and rules, between people who want to use it and people who want it to remain calm. In the next part, we will look more closely at the people inside the park. The routines, the habits, and the quiet social choreography that unfolds daily, often without anyone commenting on it at all. Until then, you may rest. Nothing else needs immediate attention. By the time Central Park settled into its role as a permanent feature of the city, it had also developed something less visible but equally important: routines. Quiet, repetitive patterns that repeated daily, regardless of season, politics, or general mood. Early in the morning, the park belongs to people who prefer fewer conversations. Runners move in steady loops, counting distances rather than thoughts. Dog walkers perform short, polite negotiations between animals that do not know one another and do not particularly care. Maintenance crews work efficiently and without ceremony, undoing yesterday's damage before most of the city notices it happened. This early hour is practical. No performances, no crowds, just movement, purpose, and the faint understanding that the rest of the city has not yet woken up to interfere. As the morning progresses, the park's character shifts. Tourists appear, often moving in uncertain directions while looking at maps that refuse to be helpful. They stop suddenly. They stand in bike paths. They attempt to photograph trees that look identical to every other tree they have already photographed. Locals adjust by stepping around them with practiced patience. Late mornings belong to schools, retirees, and people who have decided today will be calmer than yesterday. Benches fill slowly. Books are opened, though not always read. Conversations happen quietly, as if volume itself might disrupt the environment. This is not accidental. The park encourages moderation. Loudness feels out of place. Rushing feels unnecessary. Even disagreement tends to soften, as if the surrounding greenery has made arguing slightly inconvenient. By midday, the park becomes more social. Lunch breaks spill onto lawns. People sit in groups, carefully choosing spots that feel private despite being entirely public. Food is unpacked. Crumbs are dropped. Birds observe closely. Central Park wildlife has learned patience. Squirrels wait. Pigeons hover. They understand that human generosity increases once people are seated comfortably. Afternoons bring families. Children test boundaries by running where they are not supposed to. Parents negotiate rules that change depending on proximity to water, strangers, or sudden silence. Strollers move in unpredictable patterns. Ice cream appears, then disappears, leaving behind small stains and brief happiness. Throughout all of this, the park remains largely neutral. It does not react. It absorbs activity without responding emotionally. This is one of its most effective qualities. As evening approaches, the park subtly tightens. Light changes. Shadows stretch. People become more aware of where they are and how long they plan to stay. Joggers return, moving faster than in the morning, as if time itself is now encouraging efficiency. Musicians appear more frequently. Some are talented, some are persistent. Most are hoping for small bills rather than recognition. Their music blends with footsteps, conversation, and distant traffic, becoming part of the background rather than the focus. After sunset, the park belongs to fewer people. Those who remain tend to know exactly why they are there. Walking home. Finishing a run. Sitting quietly for a moment longer than planned. Historically, this time of day has always made city planners nervous. Darkness introduces unpredictability. Even now, despite lighting and patrols, the park feels different at night. Not dangerous by default, but aware of itself. This awareness has shaped behavior for generations. People walk with intention. Benches empty faster. The park does not ask anyone to leave, but it gently suggests it. What makes Central Park unusual is not that these routines exist, but that they persist across centuries. While the city around it constantly reinvents itself, the park remains committed to repetition. The same paths, the same pauses, the same small acts of temporary escape. It offers no conclusions, no sense of completion. You enter, spend time, and leave, usually without anything dramatic happening. And that is exactly the point. In the next part, we will look at how different groups have used the park differently over time, and how these quiet negotiations of space have shaped its unspoken rules. For now, there is nothing else to do. The park will continue without our supervision. As Central Park continued to host these daily rhythms, it also became a space where different groups quietly negotiated how much of the park belonged to them, and for how long. These negotiations were rarely spoken aloud. They happened through habit, posture, and the careful claiming of benches. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, social class played a noticeable role in how the park was used. Wealthier visitors tended to treat the park as a place to be seen behaving correctly. Clothing was formal, movements were controlled, sitting upright mattered. The park functioned almost as an outdoor drawing room, except with fewer walls and more rules about grass. Working-class visitors approached it differently. For them, the park was less about display and more about rest. Long work hours made any free time valuable. Sitting quietly under a tree, even briefly, had practical value. This difference in usage occasionally caused tension, though it was rarely dramatic enough to be recorded in detail. Park authorities, meanwhile, attempted to maintain a version of balance that mostly favored predictability. Signs appeared, regulations were enforced inconsistently. Some behaviors were tolerated in certain areas but discouraged in others. This flexibility allowed the park to function without appearing entirely rigid, even when it was. Over time, these patterns softened. As social boundaries blurred, so did expectations. By the mid-20th century, Central Park was less formal, though still carefully managed. Sitting on the grass slowly became acceptable. Games appeared, picnics became common, relaxation became less supervised. This shift did not happen because of a single decision. It happened because enforcing old rules required more effort than quietly letting them go. Another group that reshaped the park without asking permission was artists. Painters, writers, musicians, and photographers found the park useful. Not inspiring in a dramatic sense, but reliably available, a place to sit, observe, and feel temporarily removed from enclosed spaces. Some artists came seeking solitude. Others came seeking people to observe from a safe distance. The park provided both. Benches offered long views. Paths encouraged slow movement. Nothing demanded attention. This made Central Park particularly attractive to those who needed time without explanation. At the same time, the park served as a stage for public events. Parades passed nearby. Demonstrations gathered at entrances. Concerts filled open areas with sound that traveled farther than intended. These moments disrupted the park's usual quiet, but they were temporary. Afterward, the park returned to itself. Grass recovered, sound faded. People resumed walking in loops. This ability to absorb interruption without changing permanently is one of the park's most unusual features. Cities often struggle with this. Once altered, spaces tend to stay altered. Central Park resists this tendency through maintenance, design, and a collective understanding that it should remain mostly the same. Even controversial changes tend to be subtle. New paths follow old logic. New structures imitate old materials. Progress happens quietly, or not at all. As decades passed, the park became layered with memory. Certain areas were associated with specific activities. Some lawns were known for gatherings, others for solitude. These associations were rarely official, but widely understood. Visitors learned quickly. Loud groups avoided quiet corners. People seeking calm did not sit near musicians. Joggers followed invisible lanes created by repetition rather than signage. This unspoken choreography allowed millions of people to share a limited space without constant conflict. Not perfectly, but well enough. And perhaps this is why Central Park has lasted. It does not ask people to agree. It asks them to adjust slightly, to move over, to wait, to choose a different bench. In the next part, we will look at moments when this balance failed, and what happened when the park could not quietly manage the pressures placed upon it, and for now, nothing requires immediate resolution. The paths remain where they are. Despite its reputation for calm persistence, there were periods when the park's quiet balance did not hold. These moments were rarely sudden. They arrived gradually through neglect, distraction, and the city choosing to look elsewhere for a while. One of the most noticeable shifts occurred when maintenance declined. Parks, unlike buildings, do not remain stable when ignored. Grass thins, paths soften, water features grow murky, trees begin to behave independently. This process is not dramatic, but it is very patient. When funding decreased, the park responded accordingly. Lawns closed more often, facilities aged, benches remained broken longer than intended. None of this caused immediate alarm, but together it changed how people felt inside the space. People notice when a place stops being cared for. They may not articulate it, but behavior adjusts. Visits shorten, certain areas are avoided, trust erodes quietly. By the mid-20th century, these effects became difficult to ignore. The park still existed, but it felt tired. In some sections, it felt abandoned. This created opportunities for uses that were less predictable and more difficult to manage. Crime increased, though not evenly. Some areas remained calm. Others developed reputations that spread faster than facts. This unevenness made the park feel uncertain, which is historically one of the least popular qualities in public space. The city's response was inconsistent. Policing increased in some periods, decreased in others. Plans were proposed, delayed, revised, and occasionally forgotten. The park waited. Eventually, a different approach emerged. Instead of treating the park as a background responsibility, it was reframed as an asset worth investing in directly. This shift was less philosophical than practical. The city had learned that neglect cost more in the long run. Restoration efforts focused first on visibility. Iconic areas were repaired, lawns reopened, structures were cleaned. The goal was not transformation, but reassurance. Once people felt comfortable returning, usage increased. With usage came attention. With attention came funding. This cycle, while not elegant, proved effective. Throughout this process, one principle remained constant. Changes had to appear gradual. Sudden redesigns were avoided. Even improvements were made to look familiar. New elements pretended they had always been there. This was intentional. The park's identity depended on continuity. Visitors needed to feel that nothing fundamental had changed, even when many things had. As stability returned, so did routines. Joggers resumed their loops. Musicians reclaimed corners. Families spread blankets with cautious optimism. The park slipped back into its role as a neutral space that absorbed activity without commentary. What is notable is how little the park needed to be reinvented. Its original design allowed for recovery. Paths guided movement. Open spaces adjusted naturally. The park did not resist restoration. It waited for it. This patience is not unique to landscapes, but it is rare in cities. Most urban spaces demand constant justification. Central Park, once established, required only attention. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson here. Spaces built for long use must expect periods of neglect. Survival depends not on perfection, but on resilience, on the ability to endure being temporarily forgotten without losing purpose. In the next part, we will look more closely at how the park has been deliberately preserved to appear timeless, even as everything around it continues to change. For now, there is nothing to fix. The park has already learned how to wait. One of the more deliberate choices made about the park over time was the decision to keep it looking older than it actually is. This was not nostalgia. It was strategy. Cities change quickly. Materials age. Styles shift. What feels modern one decade feels unnecessary the next. The park avoided this problem by refusing to appear modern at all. Stone was favored over steel, wood over glass. Repairs were designed to resemble replacements that had already existed in people's memories. This approach created the impression that the park had always been finished, even when it clearly had not been. Benches were replaced with similar benches. Railings copied earlier designs. Paths were resurfaced using familiar textures. The goal was visual continuity, even if the underlying work was extensive. Visitors rarely noticed these changes, and that was considered success. Preservation here did not mean freezing the park in time. It meant controlling how change was perceived. Updates were absorbed quietly, folded into existing patterns, and presented as maintenance rather than innovation. This mattered because the park's value depended on trust. People trusted it to be stable, predictable, unambitious. They did not come for novelty. They came because it was the same as last time. Even new additions followed this logic. Playgrounds were built, but placed carefully. Lighting was improved, but designed to disappear during the day. Signage remained understated. Instructions were suggested, not announced. The park's managers understood something important. Attention is disruptive. The more a space draws attention to itself, the less restful it becomes. So the park learned to stay quiet, even when doing significant work. Seasonal change was allowed to do most of the visible storytelling. Leaves fell. Snow accumulated. Flowers appeared briefly, then left. These cycles reassured visitors that time was passing normally without requiring their involvement. This also helped the park age gracefully. Wear looked natural. Irregularities felt intentional. Even imperfections contributed to the sense that the park belonged to no single moment. Contrast this with the city around it, where buildings announce their completion loudly, then age awkwardly. The park avoided this cycle by never announcing anything at all. Of course, this strategy required constant effort. Timelessness does not happen on its own. It requires funding, planning, and a willingness to undo work that looks too new. Sometimes freshly repaired areas were deliberately softened. Edges were roughened, surfaces dulled slightly. This was not neglect. It was restraint. The result is a place that feels outside of time while being carefully managed within it. A space that appears passive while responding continuously to pressure. This quiet balancing act is rarely acknowledged by visitors. They walk through the park assuming it simply exists, that it always has, that it always will. And that assumption, historically speaking, is the highest compliment a designed space can receive. In the next part, we will shift attention away from design and maintenance and toward moments when the park was briefly forced into the spotlight events that disrupted its preferred anonymity. For now, nothing demands reflection. The park is content to remain unnoticed. Although the park preferred to remain unnoticed, there were moments when it could not avoid attention. These moments were usually planned by people who did not fully appreciate how much effort went into keeping the park dull. Large public events were the most obvious interruptions. Concerts, rallies, celebrations, and commemorations periodically filled the open spaces with sound, crowds, and temporary structures. Stages were built, fences appeared. Trucks drove slowly where bicycles usually passed. For a brief time, the park behaved like a venue. This was always presented as a temporary arrangement. The grass would recover. The paths would be cleaned. The noise would leave. And usually this was true. But each event required careful negotiation. How many people could gather without compacting soil beyond repair? How much equipment could be moved without damaging routes that were older than most attendees? From a distance, these gatherings looked spontaneous. Up close, they were tightly managed exercises in controlled disruption. The park also became a stage for political expression. Protests formed, marches passed through. Speeches echoed against stone. These events were louder than the park preferred, but they were part of its role as public space. Historically, this created tension. A park designed for calm was now hosting urgency. Stillness gave way to movement. Silence to slogans. For planners, this was inconvenient. For participants, it was necessary. The park adapted by doing what it always did, absorbing the impact without responding emotionally. Once the crowds dispersed, it returned to its routines. Footprints faded. Paper signs disappeared. Grass slowly lifted itself back into place. Another form of attention came from media. Films, television shows, and photographs used the park as a backdrop. It appeared in stories as shorthand for calm, romance, reflection, or transformation. Characters walked slowly. Conversations softened. Problems were discussed with less urgency than elsewhere. This representation reinforced the park's reputation even when it was inaccurate. Visitors arrived expecting tranquility, sometimes surprised to find cyclists, musicians, and children behaving normally. Yet the image persisted. The park was seen as a place where things slowed down, even if that slowing required considerable effort behind the scenes. There were also moments when attention was unwanted, incidents that drew scrutiny, accidents, crimes, failures of infrastructure. During these times, the park's neutrality was questioned. Safety became a topic. Management decisions were examined closely. These periods were uncomfortable, but they were not new. Since its earliest days, the park had existed under observation. It was always symbolic, a test of how the city cared for shared space. When criticism appeared, responses tended to be practical rather than emotional. Lighting was improved, paths adjusted, patrols increased. The park addressed concerns without changing its character. This restraint mattered. Overreaction would have altered the park more than the incidents themselves. So changes were made carefully, often invisibly. What emerges from this pattern is a space that tolerates attention but does not seek it. The park accepts being useful. It allows itself to be borrowed temporarily for purposes it did not design for. But it always expects to be returned. After events, after crowds, after commentary, the park resumes its preference for repetition. Joggers return. Benches fill slowly. Birds reclaim unattended areas with confidence. This cycle has repeated for generations. Each time, the park survives not by resisting use, but by outlasting it. This endurance has shaped public expectations. People assume the park will recover, that it can host disruption without losing itself, that tomorrow will look roughly like yesterday. And most of the time, this assumption holds. In the next part, we will turn our attention to the natural elements of the park, trees, water, and terrain, and how they have been carefully managed to appear unmanaged. For now, the crowds have left. The park is ready to be ordinary again. One of the most carefully maintained illusions of Central Park is that its natural elements are simply doing what nature does best. Trees grow where they like. Water flows where it wants. Meadows exist because they always have. This is, of course, not how it works. Every tree in the park is accounted for. Its age, condition, and location are recorded. Branches are trimmed not when they look untidy, but when they pose a future inconvenience. Leaves are allowed to fall, but only in acceptable quantities, and only temporarily. The park does not let nature make long-term decisions. This management is subtle by design. A fallen tree feels organic. A repaired shoreline looks untouched. Streams curve gently, suggesting they were shaped by time rather than planning documents. In reality, water in the park is constantly redirected. Drainage systems operate quietly beneath paths. Ponds are cleaned, monitored, and occasionally corrected when they begin to behave too independently. Water, left alone, is ambitious. It spreads, it stagnates, it finds weaknesses. The park allows it just enough freedom to feel alive, but not enough to become inconvenient. Trees are treated with similar restraint. Species were chosen deliberately, not just for appearance, but for behavior. Root systems were considered, growth rates predicted, shade planned decades in advance. This foresight matters because trees do not respond well to sudden change. They prefer patience. The park has learned to work on their schedule, even while gently guiding outcomes. Seasonal variation helps maintain the illusion. In spring, growth appears spontaneous. In autumn, decay feels natural. Winter simplifies everything, temporarily lowering expectations. These cycles reassure visitors. They imply balance. They suggest that things are happening as they should. Behind the scenes, however, teams work continuously to maintain this appearance. Invasive species are removed quietly. Diseased plants are treated or replaced discreetly. Fertilization happens at times few people notice. The goal is not perfection. Perfection would look artificial. The goal is consistency. Even areas that appear wild are carefully bounded. Wooded sections feel untamed until one notices how paths gently prevent wandering too far. Clearings invite pause without encouraging settlement. Nature is framed, not unleashed. This controlled wilderness serves an important psychological purpose. It gives the impression of escape without requiring risk. Visitors feel removed from the city while remaining safely inside it. This balance has always been central to the park's design. Too much order would feel sterile. Too much chaos would feel threatening. The park lives in the narrow space between these extremes. Animals, too, are part of this arrangement. Birds are welcomed. Squirrels are tolerated. Larger wildlife is discouraged politely but firmly. Feeding is unofficially regulated by social norms rather than enforcement. This creates a shared understanding. People participate in the illusion by behaving as if the park is natural, even while benefiting from its management. Children learn this quickly. They explore freely, but within invisible boundaries. Adults sense where they are expected to stop without being told. The park teaches this behavior without instruction. Its layout suggests appropriate movement. Its openness encourages pause rather than possession. Over time, visitors internalize these cues. They treat the space with a particular kind of respect. Not reverence exactly, more like cooperation. This cooperation has allowed the park to remain functional despite heavy use. Millions pass through annually. Few leave permanent marks. That, historically speaking, is not accidental. The park's natural appearance is the result of constant negotiation between growth and restraint, between letting things happen and quietly undoing them afterward. It is a place where nature performs but never improvises. In the next part, we will look at how this careful balance has influenced how people emotionally relate to the park, why it feels calming, even when crowded, and why people often leave without remembering exactly what they did there. For now, the leaves are where they should be. The water stays in place. One of the more curious effects of spending time in the park is how little people remember afterward. Not because nothing happened, but because nothing insisted on being remembered. This is not an accident. The park does not offer clear narrative moments. There are no grand entrances that demand reflection, no central monument that explains the experience. Instead, time inside the park stretches evenly without peaks or conclusions. People arrive with intentions, walk, sit, think, meet, escape briefly. And then those intentions dissolve into smaller actions. A path is chosen. A bench is occupied. A phone is checked and then put away, sometimes without explanation. This lack of structure allows the mind to relax. Without decisions to make, attention softens. Thoughts slow down, not because the park is profound, but because it does not compete. Crowds do not entirely disrupt this effect. Even when surrounded by people, individuals remain enclosed within their own small routines. Everyone is nearby, but rarely involved. Eye contact is minimal, conversations stay contained. This creates a rare condition in urban life, shared solitude. People are together without needing to interact, present without obligation. This state is psychologically efficient. It requires little energy. One can simply exist. For many visitors, this is the park's most valuable function. It provides permission to pause without explanation. Sitting still becomes reasonable. Doing nothing appears intentional. In a city where productivity often defines worth, this is a quiet relief. Over time, visitors begin to associate the park with a particular feeling rather than specific memories. They remember that it helped, not how. That they felt better afterward, not why. This makes the park useful in subtle ways. People return during periods of uncertainty, stress, or transition. They walk familiar paths, sit in familiar places, and allow the repetition to do its work. The park does not solve problems. It does not offer clarity. It simply reduces intensity. This effect has been observed across generations. Writers, workers, students, and visitors all describe similar sensations. Time feels slower. The city feels distant. Concerns feel temporarily manageable. Importantly, this calm does not depend on beauty alone. It depends on predictability. Knowing that the park will behave as expected allows the mind to stop monitoring. Paths will not suddenly end. Benches will remain where they were. The environment will not demand attention. This reliability creates comfort. Children respond differently. For them, the park is a place of exploration rather than restoration. They remember specific details. A rock, a tree, a moment of running too far ahead. But even here, the park guides experience gently. Boundaries are present, but unobtrusive. Exploration feels safe. Risk feels controlled. Adults, meanwhile, often use the park to regulate emotion without naming it. A walk replaces a conversation. Sitting replaces action. Motion becomes a substitute for decision-making. This is not dramatic. It is functional. The park's emotional neutrality allows people to project their own states onto it. Happiness fits, sadness fits, indifference fits. The park does not respond differently. This makes it particularly effective during moments when people do not want to be interpreted. They can be present without being read. Public spaces that offer this are rare. Most environments demand a role. The park allows for absence of role. It is a place where one can be undefined. This quality has endured even as the city has grown louder, faster, and more demanding. The contrast has increased the park's value. As the outside world accelerates, the park remains steady. Not frozen, just consistent. Visitors often leave without marking the departure. There is no transition ritual. You simply step back onto the street and resume pace. Later, you may realize something has shifted slightly. Breathing feels easier. Thoughts feel less urgent. Nothing has changed, but something has. This subtle effect explains why the park continues to matter even to those who rarely articulate why. It is not exciting. It is not impressive. It is useful. In the next part, we will look at how this emotional role has influenced how the park is defended, funded, and protected, why people argue passionately for something they describe so vaguely. For now, there is nothing to reflect on. The calm has already done its work. Despite its quiet presence, Central Park has always required defenders. People argue over its use, its size, its maintenance, and even its purpose, though rarely with urgency. These debates are subtle, conducted in city council meetings, planning offices, and newspapers, yet they have lasting consequences. During the early 20th century, for instance, there were proposals to cut portions of the park for development. Buildings, parking, or infrastructure were suggested. Each proposal was accompanied by polite objections, careful reporting, and slow decision-making. The park itself could not speak, so it relied on citizens, planners, and administrators to speak on its behalf. This advocacy was rarely dramatic. Meetings were long. Correspondence was tedious. Arguments relied on technical details such as soil quality, drainage, and pedestrian traffic. Emotional appeals existed but were tempered. The pace of debate was slow, almost meditative. Decisions unfolded over months or years. Interestingly, these bureaucratic processes helped preserve the park. The very slowness of governance acted as a buffer against rapid change. The park benefited from inertia, a principle familiar to those who study landscapes, though less discussed in casual conversation. During periods of economic pressure, defenders of the park emphasized its utility in non-obvious ways. It provided health benefits, psychological relief, and even social cohesion. These arguments were measured, cautious, and often overlooked in favor of more immediate concerns. Yet they accumulated, quietly reinforcing the park's value over decades. Funding, too, followed this pattern. Budgets increased slowly. Maintenance schedules adapted incrementally. Infrastructure improvements were rolled out with minimal fanfare. Every new light post or path resurfacing was designed to be functional without drawing attention. The park's survival relied not on heroism, but on consistent, careful, and sometimes boring advocacy. People who cared for it understood that sudden enthusiasm could be counterproductive. Subtle persistence was preferable. Civic organizations emerged to support these efforts. Their members wrote letters, organized small events, and educated others about the park's history and importance. None of these actions were dramatic. They were deliberate, slow, necessary. At the same time, public perception of the park evolved. Visitors began to assume it would always be there, that it required attention but not excessive intervention. This assumption reinforced the quiet work of planners and advocates. If the public had assumed impermanence, the park might have faced more pressure for development. Throughout the 20th century, these dynamics repeated. Proposals for change arose. Objections followed. Compromises were made. Each time, the park remained largely intact. Its identity did not require daily heroics, only ongoing, consistent care. The park's defenders learned to work within the rhythm of the city. They avoided spectacle. They preferred documentation, analysis, and negotiation. This restrained approach proved more effective than loud campaigns, which tended to provoke resistance. By the late 20th century, the pattern was established. Central Park could absorb scrutiny, occasional misuse, and temporary neglect without losing its essential character. Its continued existence became almost inevitable, as long as it maintained its slow, steady approach to preservation. And so, as night falls in Manhattan, the park sits quietly. Streets outside may roar with urgency, the city may rush, complain, and rebuild. But inside the park, order persists, routines continue, and care unfolds at a pace so gentle that few notice it at all. In the next part, we will explore how cultural and recreational shifts in the late 20th and early 21st centuries further shaped the park, influencing who comes, when, and how they experience its quiet rhythms. For now, nothing requires action. The park exists. That is enough. As the late 20th century progressed, Central Park's role continued to evolve quietly. The city surrounding it had grown taller, faster, and more crowded, yet the park maintained its measured rhythm. New York's changing population introduced fresh patterns of use, subtly reshaping routines without demanding immediate attention. Joggers now moved alongside rollerbladers, their motions weaving a temporary choreography. Families picnic quietly, often choosing sites that appear less trafficked but are easily accessible. Dog owners navigate social etiquette that has developed over decades. Leashes, space, and timing are all silently negotiated. Children continue to explore, but with parental oversight that reflects modern concerns for safety. At the same time, events of all kinds increased in frequency, yet remained discreetly managed. Marathons, small concerts, charity gatherings, and seasonal festivals momentarily disrupted the park's calm. Still, each disruption was carefully timed and localized, allowing most areas to retain their predictable, slow-moving routines. The park tolerated intrusion without becoming fundamentally altered. Technological advancements also influenced perception. Photography, both casual and professional, grew more prevalent. Tourists and locals alike documented their visits, capturing frozen moments that suggest energy and novelty. Yet the actual experience remained largely unremarkable. Soft movement, minimal confrontation, and the faint satisfaction of time passing at a comfortable pace. Park management adapted accordingly. Infrastructure upgrades occurred gradually. Subtle improvements to pathways, lighting, seating, and signage. Each modification preserved the park's familiar appearance. Even when modern conveniences were introduced, such as improved restroom facilities or water fountains, they were implemented with restraint, blending seamlessly with the environment rather than calling attention to themselves. Social diversity increased. Visitors arrived from varied backgrounds, ages, and cultures. The park's capacity for neutrality allowed these groups to coexist without overt conflict. Even the most crowded areas maintained a sense of order because everyone unwittingly followed the tacit rules of movement and space usage established over decades. People learned through observation, where to pause, where to walk slowly, where to avoid sitting. Central Park's maintenance practices mirrored these subtle adaptations. Groundskeepers, arborists, and water specialists coordinated carefully to ensure seasonal transitions occurred predictably. Grass was rotated for resilience, trees were pruned thoughtfully. Wildlife was monitored and guided to remain compatible with human activity. None of this drew attention. It simply allowed the park to continue functioning as intended. Despite these adjustments, the park's emotional effect remained remarkably consistent. Visitors left feeling calmed, restored, or simply less hurried, even if they could not identify precisely why. This is central to its enduring appeal. It does not insist on dramatic impressions, only quiet reassurance. Public perception of the park evolved as well. Media depictions reinforced its function as a refuge, a place where time slows and the city's urgency dissipates. Yet this reputation depended entirely on continuity. Any sudden change could disrupt the delicate balance carefully cultivated over a century and a half. As the park entered the 21st century, pressures increased further. Tourism surged. Nearby developments introduced more noise, light, and human activity. Still, the park's systems, both social and physical, absorbed these pressures with minimal upheaval. Minor adjustments were sufficient to maintain the overarching sense of calm. This combination of subtle management, social choreography, and natural rhythm allowed Central Park to retain its essential qualities. It remained predictable without becoming rigid, alive without becoming chaotic, and calming without demanding attention. In essence, it had perfected the art of quiet persistence. In the next part, we will explore how contemporary challenges, such as environmental pressures and urban expansion, interact with this established rhythm and how the park continues to negotiate change while appearing timeless. For now, the grass remains soft, the trees remain steady, and time continues its gentle passage. Entering the 21st century, Central Park faced new forms of pressure that were subtler than construction or protest. Environmental concerns, climate variations, and urban encroachment became part of its ongoing negotiation with the city. Rainfall patterns shifted, summers became hotter, winters less predictable. Each change required measured response rather than dramatic action. Water systems, long managed quietly, were adjusted. Ponds, streams, and fountains were monitored for fluctuating levels. Excessive flooding in one area prompted minor diversions. Drought conditions elsewhere required temporary irrigation, carefully applied to avoid signaling that nature had failed. These interventions maintained the illusion that the park operated independently of human control. Vegetation management followed similar principles. Tree health assessments were performed discreetly. Diseased specimens were replaced or treated in a manner that preserved visual continuity. Grass and plantings were rotated to withstand heavier usage while maintaining the park's familiar appearance. Nothing appeared abrupt. Everything felt deliberate, yet accidental. Urban expansion surrounding the park intensified. High-rise buildings cast longer shadows. Noise infiltrated quiet corners. Crowds increased, including tourists unfamiliar with the unspoken etiquette of the park. Yet, even under these pressures, movement patterns adjusted naturally. Visitors learned where to walk, sit, and pause, often through silent mimicry of regulars rather than formal instruction. Technology contributed further complexity. Smartphones, photography, and navigation apps altered interaction with the space. Visitors tracked paths, documented experiences, and relied on digital guidance. This subtly modified behavior without disrupting the overall rhythm. The park remained calm, yet absorbed new ways of being used, folding them into pre-existing routines. Security and safety also adapted. Incidents were addressed promptly, but with minimal disruption. Patrols moved unobtrusively, cameras observed without dominating presence. Rules persisted quietly, paths remained structured, benches unassigned, spaces shared according to tacit understanding rather than explicit enforcement. The park's neutrality continued to support coexistence. Cultural events increased as well. Music performances, festivals, and public gatherings became more frequent. Each event occupied specific zones temporarily. Post-event, the environment recovered, maintaining the same sense of continuity that had been established over decades. Noise and disruption passed with the same unhurried efficiency as seasonal change. Importantly, the park's role as a psychological refuge endured. Visitors continued to arrive seeking calm, restoration, or escape from urban acceleration. The design and social habits cultivated over centuries facilitated these effects. Walking, pausing, observing, each action contributed to a subtle, enduring sense of order. Even the presence of wildlife persisted seamlessly. Birds, squirrels, and other small animals maintained their roles in this carefully balanced ecosystem. Feeding, nesting, and movement patterns were subtly monitored to prevent interference with human activity, ensuring that nature appeared autonomous while remaining compatible with park usage. Maintenance staff, planners, and city officials collaborated to preserve these patterns with discretion. Adjustments were incremental. Interventions were calculated to be unobtrusive. The park's identity depended on appearing timeless, even as external conditions changed rapidly. Visitors, both new and returning, internalized these rhythms without formal instruction. They learned through experience how to navigate paths, where to pause, and how to coexist in shared solitude. This cumulative understanding perpetuated the park's calm atmosphere without centralized enforcement. Central Park, in essence, continued to thrive through subtlety, patience, and consistent care. Its existence depends on observation, adjustment, and quiet persistence rather than spectacle, heroism, or dramatic interventions. In the next part, we will examine specific instances of environmental or social stress and how the park adapted while maintaining the appearance of unchanging calm. For now, the city hums around it. The park remains steady. Time flows gently. Even in the early 21st century, Central Park faced moments that tested its carefully maintained balance. Extreme weather events became more frequent. Summer heat waves and sudden storms occasionally challenged both vegetation and infrastructure. Yet each challenge was met with incremental adjustments rather than dramatic overhauls. Paths prone to flooding were subtly graded. Drainage systems were updated without disturbing visual continuity. Temporary barriers were installed only where absolutely necessary, designed to disappear once conditions normalized. The aim was always minimal visibility, disruption acknowledged but not emphasized. Tree canopies, long planned to provide shade and visual harmony, required adaptive care. Weak or diseased specimens were removed or supported, always maintaining the appearance of effortless natural growth. Flowers and ornamental plantings were rotated carefully, sustaining seasonal interest without attracting undue attention. Urban pressures persisted. Crowds grew denser during weekends, holidays, and special events. Pedestrian flow was managed not through aggressive signage, but by implicit cues, benches placed strategically, pathways subtly widened, and high-traffic zones softened with durable materials. Visitors adjusted through observation and habit, creating an unspoken choreography that maintained order. Technological encroachment subtly affected behavior. Smartphones and photography altered attention spans. Visitors paused for pictures, tracked movement, and occasionally bypassed quieter spaces. Yet the park absorbed these changes seamlessly. Footpaths endured increased wear. Seating areas remained functional. Wildlife continued its patterns, undisturbed by digital intrusion. Public gatherings introduced additional complexity. Small concerts, charity runs, and seasonal festivals brought temporary noise and density. Yet each event was confined spatially and temporally, with careful post-event recovery. Grass was aerated, paths repaired, and maintenance crews quietly restored balance, ensuring that the park's overall atmosphere remained consistent. Central Park's social patterns also continued to evolve. Diverse visitors from tourists to local residents shared the space with minimal friction. Children explored within unspoken boundaries. Adults moved deliberately, mindful of shared solitude. Dog owners, joggers, and casual walkers negotiated routes silently, following cues embedded over generations of practice. The park's continued neutrality allowed it to serve as a refuge despite surrounding urban acceleration. It did not demand attention. It did not require dramatic engagement. Instead, it offered gentle, persistent calm, a psychological buffer where time slowed without spectacle, and where repeated daily routines reinforced predictability. Maintenance, planning, and subtle intervention have been critical to this endurance. Incremental changes prevent degradation without creating conspicuous alterations. The park remains visually consistent, emotionally reliable, and socially adaptable, qualities that have sustained it across centuries. Even minor disruptions lost children, sudden storms, or isolated conflicts are absorbed without fundamentally altering the environment. Each situation resolves with minimal impact, preserving the illusion of constancy. The park exists as a carefully managed space that appears spontaneous and timeless. In this way, Central Park maintains its quiet authority. It shapes human behavior through subtle cues rather than explicit enforcement. It absorbs environmental pressures without panic. It remains simultaneously adaptive and consistent. In the next part, we will consider how programming, recreation, and cultural shifts in recent decades further influence park dynamics, and how its management continues to balance historical preservation with contemporary usage. For now, the water continues to flow, the leaves remain where they should, and the park continues to exist, unbothered by urgency. Cultural and recreational trends in recent decades have quietly influenced Central Park's daily rhythms. Organized activities, yoga classes, running clubs, Tai Chi sessions, introduce new forms of consistent motion. These groups occupy specific areas at predictable times, blending with the park's existing social choreography rather than disrupting it. Tourism, meanwhile, has grown steadily. Visitors arrive in large numbers, guided by maps, apps, or tour leaders. Their presence introduces unpredictability, but the park's scale and layout absorb it. Open meadows and pathways distribute people in ways that reduce congestion. Even in crowds, the same patterns of shared solitude persist. People learn where to walk, when to pause, and how to coexist with minimal interaction. Infrastructure and technology have adapted subtly. Benches, paths, and lighting continue to be updated incrementally. New materials mimic older ones to preserve the perception of continuity. Signage is functional but unobtrusive. Wi-Fi, wayfinding apps, and other modern conveniences exist, but do not dominate the experience. The park absorbs progress without betraying its slow, deliberate identity. Wildlife interactions remain carefully monitored. Squirrels, birds, and other small animals navigate human activity while visitors generally respect unspoken boundaries. Feeding is tolerated in specific zones. Nesting sites are preserved. These subtle interventions maintain the illusion that nature operates independently, though it is quietly guided. Environmental stewardship has become increasingly important. Ponds, streams, and lawns are monitored for water quality, erosion, and sustainability. Seasonal changes, falling leaves, blooming flowers, snow accumulation are respected, but interventions occur when necessary to maintain predictability. Nothing is abrupt. Everything unfolds gradually. The park's psychological role remains consistent. Visitors leave calmer than when they arrived, even if they cannot articulate why. Walking slowly, pausing on a bench, observing movement without participating, these behaviors continue to reduce stress and provide a sense of temporal stability. Central Park, in effect, functions as a slow-moving temporal buffer, allowing the city around it to accelerate without spilling entirely into its space. Social patterns are preserved through tacit understanding. Families, joggers, dog walkers, tourists, and occasional performers all coexist with minimal conflict. Children explore, adults pause, and routines form naturally. The park does not enforce compliance aggressively. It relies on human adaptation and subtle guidance. Even in moments of disruption, such as special events, temporary constructions, or extreme weather, Central Park remains resilient. It absorbs impact quietly, restores equilibrium gradually, and maintains its appearance of timelessness. The contrast between transient activity and enduring calm is one of its defining features. Historical preservation and contemporary management coexist carefully. Landmarks, pathways, and trees are maintained to appear continuous across decades, while minor adjustments accommodate modern needs. Visitors perceive consistency. Internally, the park adapts without calling attention to its interventions. This balance requires ongoing, understated effort. Ultimately, Central Park endures because it manages change with discretion. It allows life, culture, and nature to interact without becoming overwhelmed. It maintains patterns while absorbing novelty. It preserves calm without requiring inactivity. This combination of subtlety, patience, and foresight ensures its survival in a city defined by motion and unpredictability. In the next part, we will examine how recreational use patterns interact with environmental management and how Central Park remains a functional, calming, and seemingly eternal presence despite pressures from both nature and society. For now, the paths are empty enough to notice nothing in particular. The park continues, quietly persistent. Recreational use patterns in Central Park continue to shape the experience of visitors, often without anyone consciously noting it. Runners follow invisible lanes formed over decades. Walkers pause where benches suggest a temporary rest. Children navigate boundaries established by habit and subtle visual cues. Every action contributes to the park's collective choreography, reinforcing its identity as a calm, ordered space. Organized activities, yoga sessions, running clubs, informal sports exist alongside these routines. They are predictable in time and location, minimizing disruption while introducing slight variations that prevent monotony. Even when multiple groups occupy nearby areas, tacit social rules allow coexistence. People step around, adjust pace, or shift positions without confrontation. The park absorbs these movements, maintaining the illusion of tranquility. Environmental management continues silently. Trees, shrubs, and lawns receive ongoing care designed to be invisible. Fallen branches are removed discreetly. Water levels in ponds and streams are monitored continuously. Seasonal planting is timed to appear natural. Even when minor damage occurs from human activity, repairs are subtle, preserving the sense that nature operates independently. Technological influence persists subtly as well. Smartphones, cameras, and GPS applications slightly alter patterns of movement, but the park accommodates these changes gracefully. People pause to take photographs, check directions, or navigate efficiently, yet these behaviors integrate into existing routines without overwhelming the space. The park's scale and layout absorb novelty, ensuring that no single activity dominates. Public events remain carefully managed. Marathons, charity walks, concerts, and festivals occupy limited zones temporarily. Post-event recovery is systematic. Grass is aerated, pathways are repaired, and temporary structures removed. The atmosphere of quiet endurance is quickly restored, maintaining continuity for subsequent visitors. The park does not resist attention, but it neutralizes it, allowing daily rhythms to resume seamlessly. The psychological function of the park endures. Visitors leave calmer, more measured, even if they cannot articulate why. The combination of predictable routines, natural elements, and subtle social guidance reduces cognitive load. Time slows perceptually, even as the city beyond its borders accelerates. The park functions as a temporal buffer, mediating human experience through gentle constancy. Social norms continue to reinforce calm. Families, tourists, joggers, and casual walkers implicitly follow patterns established over generations. Children explore, adults pause, and routines form naturally. Disruptions are absorbed without aggressive enforcement. This reliance on human adaptation rather than overt control is central to the park's enduring stability. Maintenance and preservation operate in tandem. Historical features are preserved with attention to detail, while contemporary needs are accommodated quietly. Benches, pathways, signage, and lighting are updated incrementally. Every intervention is designed to maintain the appearance of continuity. Visitors perceive the park as timeless, even as subtle change occurs. Environmental resilience remains a priority. Trees, shrubs, and water features are monitored continuously to withstand human pressure and natural variation. Seasonal changes, falling leaves, snow accumulation, spring growth, are integrated into the perception of calm. Wildlife patterns are managed delicately to maintain coexistence with humans. Ultimately, Central Park thrives through subtlety and consistency. It allows movement, interaction, and recreation without sacrificing its essential tranquility. Change is gradual, impact minimized, and perception controlled. The park remains a space where urban chaos is absorbed, transformed, and released slowly, without drama. In the next part, we will examine how large-scale urban development pressures intersect with park management, and how these pressures have influenced both planning decisions and visitor experience over the past 2 decades. For now, nothing requires attention. The park endures quietly, as it always has. Large-scale urban development surrounding Central Park has introduced subtle pressures that require ongoing management. Construction, traffic, and nearby high-rise buildings create environmental changes, shifting light patterns, new wind flows, and increased noise. Yet the park absorbs these pressures quietly, using both design and routine to maintain calm within its borders. Planners and maintenance teams anticipate these impacts. Trees are positioned to mitigate shadows. Water features are monitored for altered drainage. Pathways are adjusted slightly to accommodate changing foot traffic. None of these interventions is dramatic. They appear natural, preserving the illusion of independence from urban forces. The social dynamics of visitors adapt similarly. Crowds shift according to time of day, season, and weather, but the park's scale ensures that the overall rhythm remains consistent. Families, tourists, and casual walkers adjust movement patterns instinctively. The park subtly guides behavior through its design. Gentle curves, seating arrangements, and vegetation placement communicate where to pause, walk, or avoid. Cultural events continue to be accommodated with discretion. Seasonal concerts, marathons, and temporary installations occupy specific zones. Recovery after these events is systematic yet unobtrusive. Grass is aerated, paths repaired, and temporary infrastructure removed. Visitors arriving afterward encounter a space that seems unchanged, preserving perception of stability. Environmental stewardship remains central. Plantings are rotated for resilience. Invasive species are managed carefully. Wildlife patterns are monitored to coexist with human activity. Seasonal cycles, spring blooms, summer shade, autumn leaf fall, winter barrenness, are allowed to play out naturally but within managed limits. The park's natural systems appear autonomous while being subtly guided. Technology and urban lifestyle have influenced behavior, but minimally. Photographs, fitness apps, and digital maps subtly alter movement, but the park accommodates these changes without disruption. Its physical layout disperses visitors, while social norms guide interactions. Shared solitude persists even in busier periods. Maintenance continues incrementally. Benches, pathways, and lighting are updated quietly. Every intervention preserves historical aesthetics while adapting to contemporary needs. Nothing demands immediate attention from visitors. The experience remains continuous and predictable. The psychological effect of these adaptations is profound yet understated. Visitors leave feeling calmer and temporally slowed. This results not from dramatic interventions, but from the park's consistency, subtle social cues, and managed natural environment. Its tranquility persists despite surrounding acceleration, maintaining its function as an urban temporal buffer. Even minor disturbances, temporary construction, sudden weather, or small accidents are absorbed. Recovery is immediate but unobtrusive. The park does not resist human use, it integrates it, ensuring that daily routines continue largely uninterrupted. Ultimately, Central Park's endurance depends on slow, deliberate intervention. It thrives not by dramatic action, but by careful, continuous management, social guidance, and environmental monitoring. The park remains a space where the city's chaos is softened, time stretches gently, and nothing insists on being noticed. In the next part, we will explore specific restoration projects from the past 2 decades, showing how these interventions maintain continuity, calm, and the park's carefully cultivated perception of timelessness. For now, the paths remain empty enough to feel vast. The park continues quietly, unobserved, but persistent. Restoration projects over the past 2 decades illustrate how Central Park maintains its identity while accommodating change. Interventions are deliberate, incremental, and designed to remain invisible to casual visitors. Paths are resurfaced to prevent erosion, but the materials mimic older textures. Benches are replaced or repaired with wood and metal similar to existing designs, preserving continuity. Bridges, fountains, and monuments receive careful attention to maintain visual harmony. Nothing is sudden, nothing draws attention. Vegetation management plays a central role. Trees are pruned gradually, dead wood removed quietly, and new plantings introduced to replace what cannot recover naturally. Seasonal flowers are rotated to maintain color without appearing forced. Ponds and streams are monitored for water quality, and minor adjustments are made to ensure consistent flow. Wildlife, from birds to squirrels, is supported without overt human interference, creating the illusion of an untamed, self-sustaining environment. Visitors experience these changes as stability. Runners continue along familiar routes. Families find benches in expected locations. Children explore within the same informal boundaries. The park's rhythms persist despite subtle, constant work behind the scenes. Social behaviors like avoiding overly crowded areas or giving space to dog walkers reinforce the park's predictable order. Cultural and recreational events are integrated carefully. Marathons, charity walks, and outdoor performances occupy specific zones for limited periods. Post-event restoration returns the landscape to its usual calm, ensuring continuity for subsequent visitors. Even during peak tourist seasons, the park absorbs foot traffic, noise, and occasional disruption without losing its characteristic tranquility. Technological influence continues subtly. Cameras, smartphones, and digital navigation affect movement, yet the park's layout and established patterns accommodate these shifts effortlessly. People instinctively adapt, maintaining the illusion of seamless coexistence with the environment. The psychological impact remains consistent. Visitors leave feeling temporally slowed, emotionally lighter, and subtly restored. Central Park achieves this not through spectacle but through consistent attention to spatial, social, and environmental detail. It absorbs the pressures of a modern metropolis while appearing timeless and self-regulating. Even minor disruptions, temporary construction, sudden weather, or small accidents are addressed discreetly. Recovery is methodical, preserving perception of stability. The park does not resist human activity. It adapts, integrating change without disruption. In essence, Central Park's endurance relies on patience, discretion, and subtle management. Its social, environmental, and physical systems interact to create a space where urban chaos is softened and visitors experience quiet continuity. In the next part, we will examine how these patterns of careful adaptation have influenced the park's long-term cultural significance and public perception, reinforcing its role as a city-wide refuge. For now, the trees continue to sway. The paths remain worn in familiar ways. The park exists, quietly persistent, unremarkable, and steady. Over time, Central Park's careful adaptation has shaped its cultural significance. The park is more than open space. It is a repository of urban memory and collective habit. Visitors expect calm, predictability, and subtly guided experience. These expectations are reinforced daily through repeated observation of movement patterns, social norms, and environmental constancy. The park's identity as a refuge relies on this unspoken agreement between human behavior and environmental design. Families, joggers, tourists, and casual walkers follow invisible cues paths. Curved gently, benches suggest rest, and vegetation subtly directs circulation. Even when the city outside accelerates, inside the park, routines slow. Everyone adapts to shared rhythms, learning the rules without needing instruction. Public events continue to shape perception without disrupting core patterns. Concerts, charity walks, and seasonal festivals occupy limited zones temporarily. Afterward, maintenance restores lawns, pathways, and minor infrastructure, leaving minimal visible evidence. Visitors perceive continuity. The park's history appears unbroken, even as small interventions preserve safety, aesthetics, and usability. Environmental stewardship reinforces this stability. Trees, lawns, and water features are continuously monitored. Seasonal changes, spring growth, summer shade, autumn leaf fall, winter dormancy unfold naturally, though subtly guided. Wildlife, from squirrels to birds, is managed discreetly to coexist with humans. Visitors sense nature's presence, unaware of the quiet interventions ensuring its order. Technological influence is integrated seamlessly. Smartphones, photography, and navigation tools subtly alter movement, but the park absorbs these changes. Paths, social patterns, and behavior adjust without breaking the overarching calm. Crowds disperse naturally. Shared solitude persists. Even in moments of minor chaos, the park reasserts predictability. Psychologically, the park continues to provide temporal respite. Visitors leave feeling calmer, their attention and thoughts slowed by repetition and spatial consistency. Central Park functions as a buffer against urban acceleration, mediating experience without overt instruction. Its identity as a quiet refuge is maintained through subtle, continuous care, social norms, and environmental design. Historical preservation and contemporary management intersect here. Interventions are incremental, avoiding abrupt visual or functional change. Benches, pathways, and landmarks maintain historical aesthetics, while modern needs safety, accessibility, resilience are accommodated quietly. The park's perceived timelessness depends on this careful, patient approach. In essence, Central Park persists because it adapts subtly, absorbs pressure, and maintains continuity across generations. It remains functional, calming, and enduring, even amid social, environmental, and technological change. Visitors leave unaware of the deliberate orchestration behind its apparent simplicity. In the next part, we will explore how contemporary visitors interact with the park's layered history, and how the space mediates personal experience while retaining collective rhythm. For now, the grass is still, the trees sway slightly. The park exists, quietly persistent, unobtrusive, and steady. Contemporary visitors engage with Central Park in ways that are both familiar and subtly new. People bring devices, cameras, and schedules, yet the park accommodates them without requiring dramatic change. Paths, benches, and lawns guide movement naturally. Social behaviors slowing down near children, stepping aside for joggers, yielding space for picnics, persist with minimal enforcement. The unspoken rules developed over generations continue to shape experience. Families remain a constant presence. Children explore corners gently bounded by vegetation and pathways. Adults pause, observe, or walk slowly. The park encourages temporal awareness, not productivity. Even brief visits leave subtle effects: slower breathing, less urgent thought, a faint sense of calm that persists after departure. Recreational groups continue to occupy predictable zones. Yoga practitioners, running clubs, and informal sports users exist alongside casual walkers. Their activities add gentle variation to routines without disrupting the park's underlying rhythm. The timing and location of these gatherings are largely habitual, blending into the park's choreography. Technological influence is subtle but persistent. Smartphones, GPS apps, and cameras influence routes and pauses. Visitors photograph familiar landmarks, track distances, or map paths digitally. Yet these intrusions do not overwhelm. The park absorbs novelty, maintaining its appearance of timelessness. People adapt without instruction. Their behaviors integrate seamlessly into the collective rhythm. Environmental stewardship continues quietly. Trees, shrubs, and lawns are monitored and maintained incrementally. Seasonal cycles, spring growth, summer shade, autumn leaves, winter dormancy, are allowed to unfold while being subtly guided to prevent disruption. Water systems are adjusted without visibility. Wildlife remains present, managed discreetly to coexist with human activity. Nature appears autonomous, though it is carefully curated. Cultural and social norms reinforce calm. Visitors learn to respect shared solitude. Even in dense crowds, routines maintain order. The park's predictability allows emotional regulation. Individuals experience restoration without consciously recognizing the mechanisms behind it. Historical preservation persists alongside modern management. Pathways, seating, bridges, and monuments are maintained to appear consistent over decades. Interventions are incremental and unobtrusive. Visual continuity preserves the sense of permanence. Visitors perceive stability even amid subtle updates. Overall, Central Park continues to function as a psychological and social buffer. It absorbs urban pressure, mediates human behavior, and provides gentle restoration. Its endurance relies on subtle management, social norms, and environmental guidance. The park's quiet persistence remains its defining characteristic. In the final part, we will summarize Central Park's historical journey, examining how centuries of careful design, social adaptation, and environmental management have created a space that endures as both urban refuge and cultural touchstone. For now, the light falls evenly. The park exists quietly, as it always has. After nearly 2 centuries of construction, restoration, adaptation, and quiet negotiation, Central Park has achieved something remarkable in its understated way. It exists as a constant in a city that otherwise thrives on change, noise, and urgency. Its success is not measured in monuments, dramatic events, or fame, but in persistence, an enduring ability to absorb pressure, integrate novelty, and maintain a rhythm largely unnoticed. From the displacement of early residents to the careful planting of trees, from meticulously designed paths to subtle management of wildlife, every layer of the park reflects deliberate, patient effort. Change has occurred continuously, but it is integrated so seamlessly that visitors rarely notice the interventions. The park appears timeless, even though it is the product of centuries of subtle orchestration. The people who use the park reinforce this endurance. Tourists follow familiar paths. Locals stroll predictably. Families, joggers, performers, and solitary observers coexist under the guidance of tacit social norms. Children explore within boundaries they discover through observation. Adults pause, walk, and watch with minimal interaction, contributing to a collective choreography that maintains calm. In this way, human behavior supports the park's identity as much as its designers, gardeners, and managers do. Environmental stewardship underlies the illusion of independence. Water flows, lawns grow, trees provide shade, and wildlife persists, all while subtly guided to remain compatible with human activity. Seasonal variation enhances the park's sense of continuity, creating gentle reminders of time passing without urgency. The park's systems function in harmony, producing calm as a side effect of careful management. Even disruption storms, crowds, festivals, and technological intrusions are absorbed with minimal visible effect. The park remains predictable, restoring balance quietly and methodically. Its resilience is procedural, social, and environmental rather than dramatic or conspicuous. Psychologically, Central Park offers a rare urban gift, the ability to slow down, experience space without demand, and leave calmer than one arrived. Visitors rarely articulate why this occurs, they simply feel it. This effect is deliberate, the product of centuries of design and adaptation that favors subtlety over spectacle, repetition over surprise, and patience over urgency. In sum, Central Park is both ancient and contemporary. It is managed yet appears natural, social yet quietly individual, enduring without asserting itself. Its history is not marked by dramatic moments, but by centuries of continuous, careful, and largely invisible work. It has survived because it embraces persistence, subtlety, and slow change as guiding principles. And so, the park continues to exist. The paths remain familiar. Trees sway slightly, water flows in predictable courses, visitors come and go, observing routines they may not fully notice. The park does not demand attention. It simply persists, quietly mediating the passage of time and human experience. This is the enduring lesson of Central Park, that patience, subtle care, and consistency can produce a space that survives, calms, and adapts, all without requiring dramatics, spectacle, or urgency. And with that, our journey through the park's slow history concludes. You may now rest, as the park quietly does the same.